It was really, really heavy, but I got out of it in a better way. That is growth through a heat experience. We often say people learn through experience. They actually don't learn through experience. They learn through reflecting on experience. Real growth doesn't happen alone. It happens with others. When things are really complex, then unfortunately, you can't solve it by making it more simple. You can only solve it by holding more complexity. You need gas to go on a road trip, but nobody goes into their garage and gets excited about the amount of gas that they have in their garage. We got a little bit too excited about the gas or the money in our corporations. We made that the goal. The amount of organizations that actually actively push to do a lot more good than harm is unfortunately not enough.
Your most mind-altering hour of the week. Hi, you're listening to Shift Happens, and I'm your host, Ina.
With us today is Mark Vernooj, a leading figure in the field of innovation and leadership. Mark is a partner at THNK, School of Creative Leadership, where they are grooming the creative leaders who will make a positive impact on the society and lead us into the 21st century. Mark is the go-to man for designing and delivering top-notch programs that help leaders tackle tough challenges with creativity and grit. We'll talk about purpose and profitability. We'll talk about leading and motivating teams. We'll talk about the skills that will define success in the future, driving effective change, meta skills, regenerative practices, and so much more.
Mark, welcome. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be here. It's good to be talking, and I'm excited about today's podcast.
So am I, for more than one reasons, particularly because I've been part of the THNK faculty already since 2018.
Absolutely.
And we've worked together since, but we've never had the chance to meet face to face, which kind of already gives a significant quality of the leader of today, managing dispersed and virtual people who are not even in the office.
Indeed, our folks are all over nowadays, and the discussions that our clients are having, the discussions that many leaders are having about how do we motivate, how do we engage, we see engagements dropping. The Gallup survey currently says that over 80% of employees are disengaged or actively disengaged. I think 14% is actively disengaged. That means that they're actively rowing against the rest of sabotaging the company. So it's about engagement. It's about culture. How do you harness a culture when people are all in their own homes? How does that work? So this is, however you call it, this is a big challenge that leaders are facing nowadays.
Well, I haven't experienced it as a challenge for THNK because I think we're pretty much very much engaged and involved, and everybody I speak to is advocating. So who's working for THNK or with THNK is advocating for their employer, and therefore you're doing something right. What is the key, let's say, sauce or secret sauce that you are applying, you think?
Yeah, I don't know if we've cracked the code, but I think there's some ingredients that I can point to that probably help. One, we're on a mission. We're not just any old company where you go for a job. People come to us because they want to join this mission of creating the leaders we need for the world we want. So people buy into something bigger than I'm going to spend 40 hours in a seat and make sure I get some pay so that I can go on a holiday. People are buying into something big. I think that really, really helps. I think a second element that's quite important is, what do you do to actively engage a community? I think we're by no means great at this. And at the same time, particularly with staff and faculty, we're getting better and better at finding out different ways, different modalities to constantly engage. And we're always experimenting. Yeah. And sometimes that's online things because everybody's online. Sometimes in localities, when we travel there, we do something there. Sometimes it's one-on-one, sometimes it's in groups, but constantly trying to figure out what works and not settling for one thing, but reinventing yourself. I think that's another ingredient that probably helps.
Yeah, I feel that for me personally, why I feel so engaged is because there's not so much obligation and there's a lot of freedom and room for being yourself. And when I say this, I want to be a little bit more specific. For example, we're exposed to the skills that through THNK and the way you're engaging the faculty, we're exposed to the skills that you are also teaching the leaders out there. At the same time, leveraging the strengths that each and every one of us brings as a faculty, which I think is amazing, because I feel inspired to contribute as well. And then I'm learning from my colleagues versus just learning from, some members of your team specifically. And I think that's really great, the way you've done this.
I love how you phrase that. And I think it points to the fact that if the exchange between whether it's employer and employee or employer and freelancer, for me, freelancers, employee, it's all the same. It's people that work with us. When that exchange is just a financial one, it's probably often not enough. And so you're hinting on, hey, I'm learning, or some of our faculty say, this is where I find community, because a lot of my work is pretty lonely. And I love that here I've got a community to learn with, but also exchange with. I think if you manage to find something additional, then that's important. I love how you phrase that.
And also, it's the type of things we're learning, right? Regenerative practices, or using your voice. These are not the typical things that you would learn in a process-based system. It's a systemic thinking that is being applied, and we're kind of giving some ingredients that I feel will be super important in the future, such as, I feel these are meta skills. We're learning how to learn. We're learning about ourselves. We're learning to self-reflect and self-improve. If you're thinking of the top 3 skills that a leader would need for the future, are they somehow reflected in the curricula that you are giving us, the faculty? And if so, what are they? What are the top 3 skills?
Wow, that's a hard question, and I don't think there's an answer to that. But let me explain a bit more. I think one deep belief that we have is leadership is contextual, and what that means is that I have to lead. One has to lead differently in industry A versus industry B. Right. If you currently lead in an insurance company, that probably needs to be different from a consulting company, from a steel company, or an automotive company, or a digital company. And even in a digital company, 2 digital companies are not the same. Or even in consulting, 2 consultants are not the same. So the context, whether your company is growing or stalling, whether it's under pressure, whether there's abundance, all of these things give an environment in which you as a leader need to show up. And the skills you need are different. The skills and the mindset, I kind of apply that as a broad thing, that are different. Then the second thing is, you're different from me. So I can only develop certain skills to a level where it's impressive and helpful. And then there's a lot of stuff I'll just never get great at. And for you, that's slightly different. And for each one of us, it's slightly different. So those 2 components give a little bit of boundaries to which skills you need and which skills you can develop. Then I think there's a lot of skills that are timeless. So one of my friends recently wrote a book, and he said, hey, leadership, there's always this talk about new leadership. That's nonsense. I don't fully agree with that, but the essence of a lot of skills are timeless, I think, is really good. Things like EQ and IQ are probably important for a leader. Being able to take decisions, being able to create some kind of vision, being able to take people along. Those are, quite general. There's a lot of skills that were the same for Cleopatra as they are today for Elon Musk. I think then there's some skills that are newer. And I think that's where we focus a lot of our effort on.
Yeah.
What are the things that are changing? Then, since people have stayed mostly the same, it's about the environment that then creates that change. So then you got to ask, what's the shift that's happening in the environment? Well, the biggest shift, I would say, is that things are becoming less predictable, less well understand or analyzable, if that's a word, but it's less easy to completely analyze the system at work. And you started talking about systems and systemic thinking. There's so many more complex systems because the world is getting more interconnected, because it's getting more globalized, because there's way more links between all of us, because there's certain predictabilities that used to be like economic predictabilities or political powers that are all shifting. And we've seen the last couple of years a couple of big disruptions, whether it's the pandemic or the wars or all of those were not predictable. I mean, yeah, sure, somebody predicted them, but in general, we didn't. And that means that in technical terms, then we say the world is getting more complex. And if the world is getting more complex, then that is, I think, in the largest sense for leaders, the most important thing to take notice of. Now, if you believe that, then the next question is, okay, what does that mean for leadership?
Yeah.
That means then that, one, you need to be way more clear to understand when is the world actually complex and when is it just a little bit complicated
Business
as usual or simple. So you need to be able to spot that. That's a skill. Then you need to be able to deal with this complexity or ambiguity or unpredictability. So that requires a bunch of skills in terms of more sense making, more asking questions. It requires you to develop vertically. We can talk about that more at some point, but really grow up in your leadership. There's a lot more to distill there, but let me pause that. And then it requires you to think differently about how you organize. So is the hierarchy in all cases the best solution to solving complex challenges? Is a very practical example of that. But how do you organize the world around you, your company, your organization, the system you're working in, so that you can deal with it? So those would be, for me, the biggest changes.
So you mentioned, for example, process thinking, looking forward by looking back. Yeah. And I feel that Steve Jobs was right until today, that we can only connect the dots by looking backwards. I feel that's changing now. I think now we need to learn how to connect the dots by looking forward and looking into the future. I'm curious how you see that.
Yeah, I think this talks to the fact that we don't have just one brain, right? As human beings, we actually have three brains. If you define a brain as a set of nerve cells, a significant set of nerve cells and brain cells that is connected to the rest of your limbic system and to other brains. And so we have a huge set of cells and brain-like cells around our heart and actually in our gut as well. And I think those brain cells around our heart and around our gut, if you measure the size of that, it's about the size of a cat's brain. So that's not small. It's smaller than the brain up here, but those are significant pieces. So we now have, as you said, some of the scientific proof that all those things are connected. We've known that all along as human beings. We know that the mind is not separate from anything else, but we're getting more clarity on that scientifically. And I think as leaders, if not everything can be understood, can be rationally analyzed, there is also more room and more necessity to, at some point, take a leap of faith And this woman and then sometimes say, follow your gut. But it's basically talking to those other brain cells. And literally you can do exercises where you start listening to those different cells. That's possible. And we all know these things. As a matter of fact, we were born with it. I have never seen a baby that doesn't listen to their gut. I've never seen a baby in their crib thinking, I'm cold, hungry, and tired and wet. But let me shut up because my mom is so busy. It doesn't happen. They listen to their gut. So we all know how to do it. It just got deprogrammed at some point. We know how to do this stuff. And it's getting way more important in this world where it's more complex. And we have to take more leaps of faith, or at least try something out and then steer along the way.
So I feel you're saying that we're going back into our natural default way of being in the world, where we used to follow our instincts more, where we used to trust something, a sixth sense or a gut feeling in terms of navigating where the predators were or where the opportunities lay ahead of us. And it feels like we're doing some more of that in this day and age.
Well, it's in a way, you could argue it's going back. I would say it's also transcend and include. So we had something. We're good at listening to one thing, and then we don't throw that away and go all the way to the other side. No, we actually transcend that and include the next. Transcend that to the next thing, but still include what we had. So for me, it's really that. It's really about encompassing and holding more, so that at the end of the day, you can hold more complexity. Because that's the journey that you're on. If the world is more complex and you can only hold very simple concepts in your head, you are going to miss out on all the opportunities that are outside or the risks that are outside.
In a sense, the way we're dealing with complexity as a human species is by trying to simplify it for ourselves, right? So simplification was kind of a qualification or a skill that we had to apply in order to make things understandable, manageable, calculatable, measurable. How are we going to simplify when it goes berserk? And it is already, honestly, I'm waking up every morning and I'm thinking, I can't keep up. And I'm not that old.
Yeah, so simplification has been a huge invention, right? The fact that we break down really big, complicated things into small pieces, like we did in the Industrial Revolution, where we broke down this whole thing of making a car into separate components and separate steps, and we had factories and people doing amazing inventions. And for things that are difficult or complicated, but still understandable, that's okay. So it's great that we have that skill, and we should not throw it away. And if things are no longer predictable and understandable, then you can break it down or make it simple, but that's not going to work. So sometimes when things are really complex, then unfortunately, you can't solve it by making it more simple. You can only solve it by holding more complexity. And
it's interesting.
The
How do you do that?
The simplest way to just give an analogy and make this a little bit more tangible also at home, if I think about this, is you have the Flatlander debate. This is the discussion about two-dimensional species. And and they encounter a cylinder. Now, if they encounter a cylinder and they live in a two-dimensional plane, then they can either see a rectangle or a circle. Now, let's imagine that one of these species sees a circle and the other one sees a rectangle. Maybe if they're really smart, they can flip-flop back from one to the other. Now, they can fight a whole war about whether it's a rectangle or a circle, but they'll never get it right. They can agree to disagree, but that doesn't make it more right. They can agree to kind of do some kind of, as we say in the Netherlands, poldering, a middle ground, which would be some kind of ellipse, which would also be wrong. The only way to transcend that level of complexity is to add a third dimension. So therefore hold more complexity so that all of a sudden they can see that it's a three-dimensional thing. So that's conceptually how to think about this. So that for me is the skill for leaders, is to transcend themselves into where they can hold more complexity.
How do I do that? Let's say I want to transcend myself.
So one is, you've done it already quite a couple of times. Human beings do this in very distinct steps. Already Piaget found this in the early 90s, in the early 1900s. But until the 1980s, people thought that you developed psychologically until you stopped developing physically. So that when you stopped growing, they thought that you would also stop developing psychologically. It turns out, and a guy called Robert Keegan did a lot of work on this, but many others, they found out that actually you continue developing. Now, how does this work? As a baby, the way you make sense of the world is you are the world. So when this new object comes into your vision, that's when it's surprising and exciting and fun. And that's why babies love this game of putting something out in front of them and removing it, because it all of a sudden appears in them because they are the world. At a certain point, they learn that it's not that they are the world, but they are in the world, and there's other objects in that world. And that invention is super cool, which is why they love throwing it on the ground and tossing their food on the ground and having it picked up and all that.
Oh, that explains a lot.
Yeah, and so this is a logical step in evolution. We're all programmed to do this. We don't have to teach it to our kids, just like you don't have to teach an acorn how to become an oak. This just happens. And most children grow out of in that phase when they're so young, and indeed think that all of a sudden discover that there's these objects they can interact with. When they're in that phase, they're still thinking that they are their emotions. I am angry, therefore I hit. I am hungry, therefore I take the cookie of my brother, etc., etc. And at some point, most of us grew out of that, somewhere at the end of our teens somewhere. Most of us graduate into the world when we graduate out of university, so that we can postpone our emotions for the benefit of the tribe, whatever the tribe is, whether it's my family or the company or whatever, which is a huge invention for our species that makes that we can collaborate. The fact that I don't steal your glass of water now and I postpone my thirst, not that I'm thirsty, but for us to then collaborate and have this conversation or build a house or whatever it is, that collaboration comes from there. Super cool. Now, it turns out that 70% of adults kind of are stuck at that level and don't transcend that level. So this is the transcendence I'm talking about. At that level, the downside is you still are the opinions of the people around you.
Super interesting.
You still listen a little bit too much maybe to the views of the people around you, because you believe that the world is slightly black and white, that you're either in the tribe or you're out of the tribe. So as long as you hold on to the mission, vision, values of the tribe, again, whether it's your family or your company or your organization or whatever, you're valuable, you're there, you're part of it. This is also where people really want to hold on to truths. And some people graduate from this and go from this phase that we call socialized into what we sometimes call self-authored, where they start seeing that the world is not black and white, but there's actually gray in between. And all of a sudden we have additional perspective, right? It's not black and white, it's also gray. So there's more perspective here now. We're transcending perspective. And this black and white could be that now you have your own, you start developing your own mission, vision, values, and you become a change maker. Whether that's in a company or outside a company, I don't care about that word of change maker as much, but you start driving a change, within the system you're in. These are still the people that can make something beautiful happen. That can say, hey, I understand that there's the mission, vision, values of my tribe. I can see that there's others, but I'm going to follow this path.
Then they become the disruptors in company. You don't want this kind of people, right? You want the ones who are putting their head down, following what you tell them, and adapt their behavior according to your needs as a corporation.
If you believe that the world is so simple that you can manipulate it by telling people what to do, then you want people to follow what you tell them to do. But once you understand that the world is actually not that simple, or not just a little bit difficult, but so complex that is not about just giving marching orders, which we see breaking down, right? We see the breakdown of people believing that they can predict everything, and that if only people follow what they say they have to do, that it will all turn out for the best. We see the breakdown of those systems.
But that's not 90% of all change management projects, transformation programs are all about that. We have a new strategy. We need people to adjust or adapt their behaviors according to this new strategy. These are the steps they need to follow. So only the fact that they need to change their behavior for me sounds like a bit of a violation of the self-authority that you were describing earlier. And then I'm thinking, how can a person like that self-author their lives when they're meant to adapt and adjust to the system where they're in?
Well, I think we all self-author. Everybody self-authors their life if you're in that stage within a construct, right? I can be very self-authored and think about what I want to achieve, but still we're sitting here in a specific room in Amsterdam, and there's only so many things that are kind of morally okay and socially accepted to do. So there is within everything I do, there's a physical frame and there's a moral frame within which you handle yourself. There can also be an organizational frame. And that's, I think, very healthy. So change makers in an organization are super useful and need always a little bit of steering guidance. You want innovators and change makers. You want them to disrupt, and you don't want them to bet the farm, right? You don't want them to risk it all. So the art in leadership there becomes to give enough guidance and not too much structure.
72% of change management projects, though, fail these days. And we think you're helping a lot of the organizations do exactly that, actually lead transformation. So it's not just about developing leadership in and of itself, but also drive the change that this leadership is foreseeing for the organization or the company they work for. What are the top, let's say, skills or things that a leader comes to think for, and what is the top thing you wish they came for and they don't?
I think what's super exciting is that indeed a lot of our clients currently ask us, help us transform. We know it's not about just an answer. I used to be with a consulting firm, and there's plenty of great consulting firms that can give great answers of where a company needs to go. But how we get there, we find very difficult. Can you help us with that? So about 60% of our work are large transformations of large organizations. And I love that they ask us that. I would, to your point, is what would you want them to also ask? Is typically a lot of those transformations are driven by needing to create more shareholder value. That's the primary driver. It's not the only driver. As a matter of fact, almost every CEO I know has a love to create more positive impact in the world, but they really struggle with that. And how you define positive impact, I'm a fan of all the sustainability development goals. I don't really care which one you pick. But there's too few organizations, for my liking, that ask us, help us create more impact in the world. So we still nudge them in that direction, and we still we do engage in those conversations with our clients. But I would love more clients to ask that.
And making more impact in the world. Until this day, we have been thinking of that in terms of sustainability, like you mentioned, and that is mostly about not being people and planet negative, right? So not doing harm. Sometimes we're thinking a little bit how to undo some of the harm that we have already caused, right? So that was sustainability till now. And I feel that is evolving as an area of impact in and of itself. Where is it going to? Is it regenerative leadership? What is this?
I find that extremely hard. I think we're constantly trying to assess how our field is developing. One of our values is playing at the edge, or where is that edge? Is always a question that we'll never answer. I think on this axis, I find it very hard on the sustainability or the doing good axis. I find it very hard to say this is where it's going. I think what's great is that the word sustainability in the broadest sense, so not just the planet, but also the people on it and the animals on it, everything. All 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or all 3 letters of ESG, are becoming much more important and prominent in the boardroom. I think that's really good. I think it's good that we start measuring a bit more, although the European measurement way of doing that, we have some legislation that has come into effect now that every big corporation has to measure and track their impact. Is heavily accounting driven. I don't know if it's only helpful, but it's a good step in the right direction. I think indeed there's a huge push on not doing too much harm, and there needs to be more push of organizations on what is the thing we're contributing. If you then call that regenerative, I'm happy. I think there's a lot of movement in the regenerative movement. And I love that. Whether that's the next big thing, I'm not quite sure. I think there is that movement really comes inspired by nature. And I think that's really nice. I think there's a lot of analogies we can pull from nature. And at the end of the day, for me, it's a little bit about why are you here as an organization? I think if you bring it down back to the essence, why do we build an organization? In this country, it was because as one family, you didn't have enough money or resources to build a dike and a windmill to pump out the water. It was very simple. We wanted to achieve something bigger that we couldn't do alone. But it was about achieving that thing. It was never about getting money. Money was needed, maybe. At some point it became we wanted to build bigger ships to venture out further. It was about the mission we were on. And during that mission, it's like I like how Simon Sinek talks about this. He says, your mission is a little bit like a road trip. You need gas to go on a road trip. But nobody goes into their garage and gets excited about the amount of gas that they have in their garage. We got a little bit too excited about the gas or the money in our corporations. We made that the goal, and we forgot that it was all about doing something that alone you couldn't do, that was of benefit for the people around you and possibly yourself.
And now, or in addition to developing leaders or helping leaders develop, you are also facilitating other people to become leadership developers and opening up the world to more of the many. Can you speak a little bit about THNK World?
Yeah, so our dream was always, our big belief was, if we have these big problems, maybe leadership is one of the biggest levers to make a difference. If only we could change more leaders into the leaders we need for the world we want, we would be in a better place. That is the basis, the basic thinking behind our company. And I think what we do really well. The scale is too small. We're only working with a couple of thousand leaders a year. Okay. And that is not enough for the scale of the challenge we're in. And if I look at the amount of other organizations, our typical competitors are the big business schools and the big consultancies. Too few of them are focusing on really what the world needs. So there's not enough people doing this. So I'd love to, we for a long time were thinking, how can we develop more of these leaders? But our economic model makes it really expensive what we do and very inaccessible to a lot of people. And we're now we've been working for a year and a half on indeed a platform called THNK World, where we allow leaders to come to with each other in community, go through experiences, to grow, to, as we said, transform and transcend themselves. And it's super exciting to see that this turns out to be possible. Obviously, it's not Duolingo 5 minutes on the bathroom. This is a little bit more of an investment. So we built this game-like platform, and a first version is out now. Go check it out. It's online. It's called THNK World. And it's really fun. And the first feedback we're getting, and there's now a couple hundred, I think 500-600 people on it. The first feedback we're getting is really positive. So it's encouraging. There's a lot of work to do. It's very encouraging, the road we're on.
And to make it more relevant for the audience that's listening to us, when you say leader, define that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good question. A leader for us is not a position, it's not a title. Leadership for us is an act. So it's all about, do you take responsibility to, with people, go somewhere? At the end, the verb leadership for me is really simple. It's getting somewhere with other people and realizing something bigger than yourself with other people. So that's everybody in a way can be a leader. Everybody sometimes is. And when you are, that's when we want to help you. Help you grow, help you be better.
And there's something critical that you're mentioning, going somewhere and going there with others. I think that's so critical because many people say, okay, well, you need to be having a moral ambition, or you need to have a passion or purpose or something that will drive impact, and so that as not to waste the resources and your talent in this lifetime. And I believe there are plenty of us who are doing that. They are driven by a mission, one of them right here. They are driven by a mission. They are driven by offering service. And yet, exactly that what you're mentioning, the others, taking them along with you or being supported by others, that's what I'm missing. And that's why I'm contemplating a different change in direction at the moment. So where would you advise a person like myself to find the others? How do I get them, or where do I find them?
Wow. What kind of people do you want?
Equally driven, equally motivated, people who, would kind of contribute with their skills, or that we can mix and match each other's skills. Is this what I can imagine for THNK World? Is this what the platform would do?
Well, I think what the platform primarily does is it helps you grow as a leader. So it gives you the tools, practices, and mindsets to become a better leader. It does that in community with others, because real growth doesn't happen alone. It happens with others. So this is not you going online and watching a video. It's you being in a room, all of a sudden finding yourself in a room with others, guided by the software to have a conversation that hopefully touches you and opens new windows inside of you so that you can grow and the other can. So I would expect that on Think World, you would find other people that are curious in this. And that's what we hear back. We hear back that people find common travelers or fellow travelers, that they find people who think alike, or at least when they're not like-minded, at least are like-spirited. And I think in that sense, I would hope that this grows out into a community that not just grows and learns, but grows and learns in order to make the world a better place.
I heard you mention already 3 or 4 times making the leaders that we need for the future that we want. Is that correct? Is that how you phrase it? What is the future that we want? And what kind of leaders do we need for it?
Yeah, so for me, the future we want it's slightly different for everyone. And for some people, it's very different. But for me, the best way to describe it is actually to go back to the work that we did on the Sustainable Development Goals. This was a large piece of work with a large portion of the world contributing to create. This is the best version of a strategy for planet Earth that we have. It's by no means perfect. There's all kinds of flaws to it, but it's probably our best effort to draft up a little bit of a strategy for planet Earth. And there's 70 things that we describe in there that we want to achieve. And it includes all sorts of things, and not everybody can contribute to all of those things. It's completely impossible. If only you pick a sub-segment of one, that would be perfect. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people pushing things that are not on the board for those 17. You don't have to get a full bingo, but at least one stamp would be nice. So
hard to imagine a company that's not on board with the 17 sustainability goals.
Well, it's very hard to find people who don't subscribe to the fact that a lot of these things need to change. I think it's very, there's here and there your outlier denier of a problem, but those are all outliers. And they get hyped up in the media. But typically, most people subscribe to the fact that these are all good things to strive for. We don't always agree on how to get there and how much money to spend on it, but most of us agree on that it's important to get into that direction. Then, if you look at the amount of people that put some of that into practice, all of a sudden the statistics run off a cliff. The amount of organizations that name at least one SDG as important in their mission, vision, value, strategy is by no means 100%. It's probably double digits. But if you then start diving in, what do they actually do? It again runs off a complete cliff. So the amount of organizations that actually actively push to do a lot more good than harm is unfortunately not enough. And if we then talk about leaders, also amongst leaders, there's not enough people who actively do more good than harm. That doesn't mean that they don't have great intentions. And I'm not saying by any means that this is easy. Because if you run a large company and you're stuck in the system of shareholder capitalism that you can't escape from because you're in it, and you're stuck in a company that runs in a certain direction with 40,000 people running in that direction, those are not easy things to change. But we do need people who try harder than they do today.
Some companies are better than others, and now I hear you leading the conversation slightly in the direction where I was going to ask a question about, and that's specifically purpose and profitability. People on planet positivity is something that is by some companies very well embraced, But sometimes I think the challenge lies not so much in the lack of desire and not being able to make an impact. It's sometimes in the lack of real, true understanding within the organization itself in how we can produce that purpose, or how can we make that positive impact. So it's really self or contextual awareness that's lacking in that sense. And sometimes also that drives leaders to believe that purpose cannot be linked with profitability, that you have to make a choice. It's either or. You cannot have both. Can you have both?
So sure, you can have both. There's plenty of companies and organizations that do have both. And we have cool examples of products that all of a sudden really are completely sustainable and perform much better than others. There's obviously a lot of people making a ton of money off the energy transition right now, whether it's solar panels or batteries or what have you. I think there's entire companies that do really well. Like I think Patagonia is one of those companies that a lot of people like for how they think about the world. But I think it's the wrong question to ask. Is not, can you have profit with purpose, or is there a trade-off? It goes back to this point that we discussed earlier. Why did we build an organization? It was never just for profit. And if it was, that was the wrong intention. You should build a company, or you should have an organization to do something useful in the world. And if you do that really well, then most of the time you can make some money out of that. And that requires a lot of creativity. And in some industries, it's really difficult. But if it's just about making money, then you've got your priorities wrong. That was never the goal, and it shouldn't be the goal. It will not attract enough talent, so you will be stuck with too little talent. It will not excite your customers. It will not excite your partners. At the end of the day, long term, it will probably not be enough. And if it's enough to keep your company alive, then it's probably not going to fulfill your soul.
Profit may not be enough, but neither would purpose. I know plenty of companies or startups who are starting with a pure intention and a real drive to do something good for the planet, and they're faced with a huge shock when it's time to make money out of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So we're in a society and in a system where money is essential. Just like going on the road trip, you need gas. It's not exciting to gather a lot of gas, but you do need gas for the road trip, and you do need money. You need revenue, and you need profitability. It's also a proof point that the thing that you're doing is valued in the market. And not every idea that you think is good is really good. Not always is the execution good. So there's a lot of reasons why this fails. And in some cases, it's really difficult to find out how to make the economic model work and how to find a value stream that somewhere somebody is willing to pay for. So this is, it is easier to work for a bank and charge interest on some money that there is, or there is easier, sometimes it's easier to only focus on money. It probably won't fulfill you. And you're right. There is a challenge for some of the people who are really passionate and purposeful, that they're sometimes not well educated enough, or not curious and innovative enough, or they don't have the right team, or they don't have the right circumstances to get to a place where they can make it not just impactful, but also financially sustainable. Because you do need it. And if you don't, like in the airplane, if you don't put your oxygen, you have to put in your own oxygen mask on first. If you don't have enough money to have a roof over your head and make sure you have a dinner at night, then how can you take care of others?
You cannot quench a thirst from an empty glass.
Yeah.
Is the way we're financing business today changing a lot?
What we see is there's more different kinds of capital coming available. So we see more impact investors, we see more people giving different kind of loans. So there's different ways that people are trying to help fund things that are in general hard to fund. Fund impact. There's more of that happening. And as a matter of fact, that wave is getting bigger and bigger. There's if I'm not mistaken, 83 billion wealth transfer happening from the boomer generation to the next generation. So this is the biggest intergenerational wealth transfer that's happening right now. And what we see is those people that are receiving that wealth, they all have bigger impact agendas than the generation before that had.
Interesting.
In
It's like
general.
the Maslow theory coming to life, when you're having all the basic needs taken care of, finally you can think about doing good and the social impact that you can have.
Yeah. So I'm expecting this to ramp up significantly in terms of how we invest, in terms of the amount of money that's coming available, in terms of how we organize all of that. We have more interesting organizational principles with cooperatives that are coming back, with people that are pooling money in different ways. I think with such a big wealth transfer and a big change in how that wealth will be allocated, there must be a heap of innovation coming down the pipe.
I was recently having a conversation with someone who would potentially have been your competitor. And it was very funny because this person said, I don't want to mention the name, and this person said, we were trying to do the same as THNK was trying to do, only they got the subsidies. And is this still the model in which the way you're funded?
So that's an interesting point. So THNK indeed was originally funded with a subsidy. As a matter of fact, if you look at international schools that were newly founded, like ours, in the decade before we got founded, there were 3 big ones that got successful that I can count. Stanford D School, Indian School for Business, and Skolkovo in Moscow. They got funded respectively with 40, 80, and $500 billion. So that gives you a bit of a feel for what it takes to get an institute off the ground. And to start a consulting firm is doable, but an institute like ours is relatively difficult. We got a relatively small subsidy compared to those amounts, and still we got a sizable subsidy in terms of absolute amount. It's the kind of money I don't have, which made it possible to invest in the kind of thinking that was needed in order to get to where we are today. Also, that subsidy unfortunately didn't get fully paid out to us. As a matter of fact, we actually asked it not to be fully paid out because we believed at some point that we could do it without subsidies. So we actually thought that we could find a model where this was self-funding. And it turns out now, that's 10 years ago. It turns out that indeed we were able to do so. So luckily we didn't need to keep on getting subsidies. And luckily we didn't even need to burn all that money. Luckily a lot of it got to stay in the pockets of the government and get allocated to different things. And we're completely self-funded right now. We're still investing the majority of our funds in our impact and in our mission. So the goal hasn't changed, but luckily we're able to fund it ourselves now.
I know a lot of people who hear about THNK and the way you're delivering the programs from your faculty, for example, and I know they hear it from me and they say, wow, I want to be part of that team. What can I do? What can they do? What do you need? What kind of skills are you looking for? Or are you looking?
Luckily, there's a lot of people that want to work with us. So that's really great. That's also a little bit the downside for those people that want to work with us. We're allowed to be quite selective. Particularly if we look at faculty, then we look at extremely experienced folk. So people who have done the kind of work we're doing at the level we're doing it for quite some time. So none of our coaches has less than 7 years of coaching experience. And all of them have done other interesting things before they became a coach. Just to give you an example, all of our facilitators have been facilitating for a long time, and have done other things that make them more rounded than just a facilitator. So there's always people shooting us emails, and they should continue to do so. And unfortunately, there's only so many spots for these kind of things.
The reverse scarcity effect.
Yeah, we're lucky in that sense. But what's exciting is we're going to do more, particularly for faculty, to open up at least the learning that we have created internally to the world. So right now, as you know, we have a faculty academy. We train our own faculty. We have inspiration labs, all kinds of things to help our faculty develop. And we have models for that and theories and all sorts of stuff. And by end of this year, or maybe by next year, we'll open that up to the world. So that will be one of the first real faculty academies in the world, where if you are a faculty, you can learn from everything we do and can then take that to your own clients.
Blending the boundaries between the outside and inside. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'd like to touch upon another concept you mentioned earlier that I bookmarked before I move on to the next question. And that's vertical thinking. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so vertical development is the theory of adult vertical development, or adult developmental theory. That's a psychological theory that we talked a little bit about before, is this notion that as an adult you can continue to develop. We talked about how that as a child happens in 3 phases, and as an adult how you can get to from socialized to self-authored, where you start understanding that and the world is not black and white, but there's also gray. There's even one level more where people get to the understanding that black only exists because white exists, where people are not just these change makers that almost aggressively make change, but can do that with way more compassion and way more understanding of everything, of the need of all the players in the system, including the ones that are trying to change it for the worst. So there's a lot of development there. This theory describes those stages, but there's also quite a bit known about how this works, so how you grow. And what we know about that is that there's 3 things that really happen to develop yourself vertically. Heat experiences is the first.
What's heat experience?
A heat experience is where you put yourself a little bit under pressure. Experiences where the pressure is on or the heat is turned up. Think about starting a new role or starting a new job, but think also about all those moments in your private life that were a bit tough. We all know it, these moments where people went through a really tough patch and said it was really, really heavy, but I got out of it in a better way. That is growth through a heat experience. Then there is what we call elevated sense making. So more sense making, or taking a balcony perspective and really reflecting on what's happening. So taking the time out to reflect. We often say people learn through experience. They actually don't learn through experience. They learn through reflecting on experience. So if you take enough time out, and sometimes for some people that's journaling, for other people that's just talking in the bar, right? There's many ways to do this. But for some people it's meditating. But thinking about what happened, reflecting on it, and logging the learnings from that is a really big one. And then thirdly is divergent perspectives. So finding more perspectives. As you can see, I talked about this, and being able to embrace more complexity, not just black and white, but also gray, or even the fact that these things are the same, essentially. Being able to do that, it helps to get more perspectives in. And there's 1,000 ways to do this. You can do this through reading, through traveling, to talking to people. What you're doing here, all the people you interview, I mean, you get so many perspectives, but also listening to podcasts. But getting more perspectives in, taking them serious, and particularly perspectives that are different from yours. Don't just look in your timeline and just follow the things that already confirm with you. No, really find things that you don't know, or opposite visions from yours. Can be extremely helpful to open up your mind and develop vertically. So those three things: heat experiences, elevated sense making, and divergent perspectives, really help with that vertical development.
Oh, it seems like I'm on a vertical elevator all the time. And my problem is definitely not coming up with more new ideas. I feel like I'm constantly receiving seeds of new ideas, and I'm like having trouble figuring out which one do I focus on, right? Which is important, what's relevant.
Yeah.
So that's another problem. It's a luxury problem, let's put it this way.
It is a luxury problem, and it's a problem of our time, right? The problem of focus is not getting easier for us. The amount of stuff we have, the amount of opportunity we have, in that sense, I think the younger generations don't have it easier than we had it. At least for me, it was clear. I came out of university, and the only thing I had to do was score a good job. But today you have to score a good job, but not work too hard. You also need to have your hashtag van life and 1,000 other things. And you need to make a positive impact on the world. So the amount of things you have to do and the amount of choice you have in all of these things is way bigger. So the ability to focus and choose is a big one, also for leaders. Because most organizations, most teams, and most leaders have too many priorities on their plate.
Yes, that's I know that very well. It's very much home. And thinking of the future generation, sometimes I lay awake at night thinking, I brought a daughter into this world. Where am I leaving her behind into? And do I have the skills and the capabilities to prepare her for what's to come? If you had children, or perhaps some of your clients are your children in a sense, the younger generations, what would you wish to leave them with? What would you say I as a parent should focus on for my daughter?
Well, I mean, indeed, we don't have children. Luckily, we have a lot of children around us. So, but I don't envy the job that parents today have. I think it's really hard. I think there is something positive, which is, and a lot of parents forget that, is that most of the stuff that kids need to learn and develop is baked in. Earlier I said an acorn knows how to become an oak. A child knows how to develop. Most of the stuff you don't need to explain. It just comes naturally. And we focus a lot of time on the things that actually will come naturally. We just think the world is slightly too makeable, and we want it to happen at a different time than the system is ready for. So I think there's a lot about relaxing, and then I think there's a lot about just being there for them. I think if you're able to do that, I think that's probably the biggest thing. And then accept the fact that we all only become our own personalities because strange things happen in our life. And our parents are always involved in those strange things.
They're the strangest of the strange things.
So, in a way, every parent screws up their child a little bit, unintentionally. And if you give yourself a bit of grace and gratitude for that, I think that also helps.
That's comforting. Thank you. I like that perspective, especially the acorn knows how to become a oak tree. That's definitely something I can relax into. That helps. Yeah, and when we're thinking about the times we live in, it feels a little bit like sci-fi. And if you would be able to envision a universe for yourself, you can take it from any movie, a series, or a book that you may have read. Which universe would you like to live in? Maybe I can answer that question for myself. Like, I watched Lucy. Do you know that movie where she's developing the capacity to tap into her unconscious mind more and more and more, and then the movie progresses as she progresses within her ability to become aware of the things she's not aware. And the unconscious has always been a fascinating universe for me. For since I've started to be interested in Jung and Jungian psychology, and that concept of becoming super aware, as in right now they say we possess the ability to be 5 or 9% aware, and the rest remains in the unconscious. And here in the movie they reverse that thinking and they say, well, what would happen if we really were able to access that universe? So that's the universe I'd like to live in, the unconscious mind. Where would you go?
Well, what comes up for me is this beautiful book. It's already old. It's called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a philosophy book hidden in a sci-fi book. And it basically explores the question about at some point in the book, a species develops a big computer to calculate the answer to life, the universe, and everything. It spits out the number 42. And then they conclude that they don't actually know the question. So I think it's an important point about what are the big questions to ask. So I think there's real strength in a universe where people spend real time thinking about the questions to ask. But the second thing in this book is it's ridiculously funny. And it takes very serious things in an extremely playful way. So there's this one scene in which they explain that humans think that they're much smarter than dolphins because they developed all these machines and they get to do work and they get to create societies, develop money, grow. And for exactly the same reason, dolphins think that they're smarter. And I think those kind of playful ideas, I think I'd love to see more in my universe.
And now to bring it more from the, fictional universe, more down to earth. Speaking of choices, by the way, I'm really contemplating now, as we have all this globalization happening, where is my home, right? I come from Eastern Europe, born in Moldova, living here for a long time, studied in the US, and still I don't feel I have found my home. And you've lived in so many places. You've lived in Switzerland, is that correct? You've lived in Singapore,
France, Hong Kong.
In France, in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Where did you feel most at home? What's home for you?
Home is where I am myself. And that's with my wife. It's with some of my friends. There's a couple of places where where I'm most myself. It's the place where, and that's not always easy. It's an everlasting struggle. Yeah, I think life is also a little bit of a game of forever coming home.
Have you come home in 2012 when you joined THNK?
Yes, absolutely.
How did you end up there?
By sheer luck and a little nudge of the universe. No, I was working at McKinsey, a consulting firm. And I had to take 6 months out. I needed to go through a medical procedure to get a kidney transplant. which is a heavy procedure. Luckily, it went very well. And but it takes you out for a long time, and it gives you some time to pause because you also get a new life. If this wouldn't have been possible in I don't know, a couple of decades ago, I would have just not lived. So I got a new life. So that gives you time to ponder and think what am I gonna do with that life? So for me, quite quickly it became clear that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial again. I wanted it to be impactful. All my ventures before were world famous in their own town. So I wanted to do something meaningful in the world and impactful in the world and entrepreneurial. And so that was the energy with which I came out of that period. And then I was lucky enough that one of my colleagues was working on THNK, and he told me about it. He asked me to help a little bit. I went to help out, and McKinsey allowed me to do so. And before I knew it, I left that company and went here. So there was some intention, and then a lot of universe coming together to help me.
And you're working together with 2 other partners. How did you meet?
Yeah, so back then I was working with Menno and Bas, the 2 co-founders of THNK. Menno was a former colleague of mine at McKinsey. And McKinsey in Amsterdam was not that big at the time. It was about 150 people. So we knew each other. And through him, I met Bas. And we hit it off. And we went on a full, I think, about 7-year journey together. So we got to know each other really well, had the craziest of adventures, trying to build this thing that didn't exist and trying to get people to join in the movement. And luckily we got people to join, and luckily we got to build this thing and build this little home, as you called it earlier, that I now get to live in.
Beautiful. And I would also like to offer some room for you to share things that perhaps weren't asked or you feel you'd like to add.
I just feel very grateful for the journey we were just on together. I think we touched on a very rich palette of different topics. And I think it's so worthwhile to explore these things together. And I think part of what I enjoy in doing these kind of talks or podcasts or discussions is that it helps me to organize my mind again. So you reflecting back what you heard and you guiding me through these questions really helps me to learn something new again or to see things in a different light again.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us again. And come back. We hope we found this valuable. If you have any questions, you know where to find me, and I'll send them forward to Mark. And till next week, have a great week.